guys and girls, I have a very important question for you. What is something that you are good at? Maybe it's something that your parents can't do or your brother and sisters can't do. Maybe it's something that you just really love to do. But I want you to think for just a second. What is something you are good at? Think. Did you think of at least one thing? Great. I have a question. How could God use that one thing? Could you use that one thing to tell other people about Jesus? Could you use it to show love to your friends and your family? Some of you are really great at sports. How can God use a gift at sports? Some of you are really great dancers. How can God use dance? Some of you are really great at telling jokes and making people laugh. How can God use laughter? Each and every one of you are good at something, and you're probably good at lots of some things. God made you just the way you are, with gifts and talents and interests and things that you absolutely love to do. And God wants to use all of those things, but we have to be willing to let Him. Last week, we began a journey through the story of David's life. The Bible tells us about David and his life in 1st and 2nd Samuel. Last week, we learned about a man named Samuel, and God told Samuel to go to the town of Bethlehem to find the next king of Israel. Samuel met a man named Jesse and knew that one of Jesse's sons was going to be the next king. He met all of the older, bigger, stronger sons and thought one of these strong men must be the next king. But God had something different in mind. God had chosen David, the youngest and the smallest son. David was in charge of caring for the sheep. He was a shepherd. But as soon as Samuel met David, he knew that this would be the next king. But you see, David didn't immediately become the king of Israel. A man named Saul was still the king. A group of people known as the Philistines wanted to start a war with Israel, which were God's people. The soldiers met near a valley, the Philistine army on one hill and the Israelite army on the other hill. The Philistines had a secret weapon. His name was Goliath. Goliath came out of the Philistine camp, and every day he would yell and he would say mean things. You see, he was tall, he was strong, and he was scary looking. He wore a heavy suit of armor and carried a long spear. And if that wasn't scary enough, he had someone else who carried his shield for him. Every day, Goliath would come out and yell at the Israelite people.
Come and fight me. I dare you. Choose a man and send him to fight me. If he wins, your people will rule my people. If I win, my people will rule your people.
You see, Saul and the entire Israelite army were terrified of this man. Can you imagine? He was so scary, he had an entire army who were scared of him. David's older brothers were in Saul's army, and they saw how big and scary Goliath was. And for 40 days, Goliath came out of his tent every day and yelled and shouted at the Israelites, and no one would fight him. One day, David's dad sent David to take food to his older brothers in the army. So David hurried to find his brothers. When he got there, he saw Goliath and heard the mean things he was saying. He saw how afraid his brothers and the other soldiers and Saul were. And David said, "I will go and fight Goliath." Saul looked at David and said, "I see how young and small you are. You can't fight Goliath. He'll eat you for breakfast." And David said back to him, "I may be small, but I'm a fighter. I watch over my father's sheep, and I have defeated a bear and a lion. I can defeat Goliath. God helped me defeat the bear and the lion, and God will help me defeat Goliath." Saul tried to give David his armor, but it was heavy, and David wasn't used to it. So instead, he went to the stream and picked up 5 smooth stones and took his slingshot as he approached Goliath. Goliath had many mean things to say to David. He taunted him, he laughed at him, and David said, "You come against me with sword and spear, but I have come against you in the name of the Lord. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands." As Goliath went to attack David, David reached into his bag, took out a small stone, and slung it, and it struck Goliath right in the middle of his forehead, and he fell down. David had won the battle. You see, Saul and his soldiers were terrified of Goliath. They saw his size, they knew he was strong, and they heard his insults and unkind words. David showed up and heard someone who was speaking against God and knew he had to do something. David may have been small, but he was a fighter. As a shepherd, he had learned to protect his sheep. He had learned to fight, to protect, and to do the scary thing. David's time as a shepherd taught him to be a fighter and how to use a slingshot. When David went up against Goliath, God was able to use something that David was good at to defeat the enemy. Earlier, we talked about some of the things that you and I are good at: singing, dancing, sports, telling jokes, and there are so many other things that you guys are good at. This week, I've really been thinking about the fact that God wants to use the things that we're good at. God wants to use our gifts and our talents and our interests. God wants to use all of those things, but we have to be willing to let Him. If God could use David's skill with a slingshot to defeat Goliath, how could God use you this week? I would love to hear how God is using you and how God is working and moving in your life. I hope you guys are having a great week, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.